Okay, thank you and welcome members. Our meeting is now being broadcast online and throughout Parliament buildings, and just would like to welcome those people watching online today. And just to advise, we have just had about an hour and a half session, a strategic planning session as a committee, and we got through a lot of good work there in terms of our forward work programme for the next 2 years, and a bit of a recap in terms of what we've covered. We did agree a number of actions, and what we will do is the clerk and her team will pull those together, and we will deal with those other matters arising to sign those off in public session next week if everybody's in agreement. Okay, so if you just ensure your mobile phones are muted, and to remind that there's no photography or recording allowed. Okay, so we'll proceed with the agenda. So we have one apology, and that's from Sinead McLaughlin. I think everybody else is in attendance. So any declarations of interest to declare? No? Okay. So in terms of chairperson's business, just to advise that the EU Affairs update from the Executive Office was scheduled for today, but it has had to be deferred due to illness, and we hope that it will be rescheduled for a date in May, and indicatively at this stage it's looking like the 21st of May. Okay, so draft minutes, members, you'll find these on pages 6 to 13 of the pack, and I would ask if members are content with these minutes as a true reflection of the proceedings of the 9th of April. Go ahead, Timothy, please.
Chair, 3 points to raise.
Okay.
One of them would be in minutes, and the two you might want to take under AOB, but they both, or all three, relate to gaps in the equality legislation. Okay. So regarding minutes, page 5, agreed action number 2, where it states the committee agreed to retitle the inquiry to more closely reflect the content of the draft final report. Yes, I was present at the meeting. That wasn't my recollection at all. And just to put it on the record, that I'd be completely against renaming an inquiry that this committee has carried out. I think that would be a renegade step to set out terms and reference of any inquiry, put a title to it, and then once it's completed, to then change the title. So I would be wanting to put the marker down. That's not my recollection of the meeting, and I certainly wouldn't be in favour of changing the title so that members can use it as a softball to try and garner support throughout their party. Okay,
do you want to go up to all three and then I'll
yep.
respond and then maybe
happy
get
enough then. The second point I want to raise is regarding the UK Supreme Court ruling. Obviously it directs very much to this committee and relates to the inquiry that we did carry out, and that it ruled that sex in the Equality Act 2010 refers to biological sex, and on that basis I think before we do too much more I know there's a meeting scheduled next week where we're going to look at the draft report. I think it would be very pertinent to this committee to try and commission our own legal advice to ensure that the UK Supreme Court ruling applies here in Northern Ireland, or indeed if some that you hear chatter in the background, noise in the background, that the Windsor framework strikes it down. I think we need to get clarity here that what was ruled in the UK Supreme Court last week applies in Northern Ireland. And the third thing is, Chair, and it relates to a point that you raised in the Assembly on Monday, which again relates to gaps in equality legislation. I just want to quote you: I trust that the ruling, whatever our views on it may be, has at least demonstrated the merit of a single Equality Act here in Northern Ireland, and of courts providing clarification on such legislation once it's produced. Your public comment relates to this committee, your public comment relates to the work we're carrying out, and I'm looking at any of the bills produced, and at the very front cover in all the bills produced it talks about there has to be a legislative competence statement, and it says, in my view, and for this one, which relates to the Justice Bill, in my view the Justice Bill would be within the legislative competence of the Northern Ireland Assembly. So before we go any further regarding the gaps in equality legislation, the bill that may or may not come, we need to be very clear that anybody putting their name to this, we don't wait on the courts making the ruling. We need to ensure that before we get to that stage that we are confirming it's within the legislative competence of the Assembly. Otherwise it won't go on the order paper. So I'm talking about gaps in equality legislation. So on Monday you said it would be up to the courts to decide, going by what I quoted in Hansard, and I quote you again, I trust that the ruling, wherever our views on it may be, has at least demonstrated the merit of a single Equality Act here in Northern Ireland, and of courts providing clarification on such legislation once it's produced. No, you don't do it that way about. Somebody needs to sign this off, and the legislative competence to say that it's within the law.
Sign what off?
Sign
We don't
what off?
have legislation.
But I'm talking if there is legislation.
But we're
whereas-
not, that's hypothetical.
That's right. Well, first,
you-
no,
you
hold
want
on.
to
You
go
made
on.
quite a lot of points, and I need to go back on them. First of all, the issue of what we call the resultant report. I think we all thought that there would be merit, and there's a justification, or there's the perspective of some in terms of what we actually did as an inquiry doesn't reflect the title. So I take your point on that. But my party's position on a single equality bill has not changed. What my taken from the Supreme Court ruling last week was that we need to have protection in law for women. We need to have protection for law for trans women, and a point that has been raised around this committee table for many months is that we should have legislation that provides the protections, up-to-date protections for women and trans women here in Northern Ireland. The Supreme Court ruling did not try to undermine protections from discrimination or harassment for trans women, but it was related to the Single Equality Act in GB, not here. So it was in that regard. So I wasn't trying to undermine any judgment last week, and what I was saying was we need tidied up equality legislation here in Northern Ireland that gives clarity to individuals and to public bodies alike. So please do not misinterpret what I said.
Certainly
Sorry, I'm going to go to Brian. Go ahead, Brian.
Okay,
Oh, sorry, and then Carol, I'll bring you in after. Sorry, Carol, missed your hand.
in terms of the minutes of the last meeting, I mean, I was the one that proposed or suggested that the inquiry report could be called a comparative study of equality legislation, and I stand over that suggestion. When I suggest that, nobody expressed any opposition. Quite a few members said that wouldn't be an issue for them. So if people now are saying they don't agree with that, the matter was to be brought back to us anyway.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
There was no final decision made, and that's what's explained in the minute. But the matter will come back to us anyway, whether or not somebody wants the minute removed. But there was no objections expressed last week. I was making the point that we are the Northern Ireland Assembly, so we don't always just replicate everything that happens in GB, even though on many occasions we do. But we have the right to make laws, legislation that reflects the views of people in Northern Ireland and has regard for local people's concerns. So
Yep.
that's the purpose of that. But the matter will come back to us anyway.
Absolutely, I totally agree. Carol, go ahead, please.
So, I mean, getting legal advice in terms of the British Supreme Court ruling of the 16th of April, I have no issue with at all. But at the end of the day, I imagine at this stage, the implications of here, because it doesn't include here, will need to come from the Equality Commission and perhaps others. So, I mean, certainly, even if legal advisors come in to say that, I've no issue. What I do have an issue in is the variations of interpretation of what happened on the 16th of April. And and if we are inviting some legal advice in, I would also request or propose that we look at the sex discrimination order and another legislation that we have to ensure that trans people are protected as well. The issue around all of this, and even in the Assembly, has become quite toxic. And what I would just appeal to people is that just to remember that they're human beings in the middle of all these debates and who are loved. And we just need to approach this with sensitivity and compassion. But I have no issue getting legal advice, because like any other bit of advice, it's given to us. What we do with that advice is a different day's crack.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else want to? No. Okay, so there's a proposal.
Sorry, I was going to, if it's okay,
Yes.
if you like, I can reword,
Okay.
suggest an alternative form of words, if that is for the minutes, if that's what you want to do, I can do that.
Yes.
So
Okay, that's fine. And I suppose I'm happy as well that we seek legal advice in terms of what this means, but I also think that we should write to the Equality Commission. I'm due to meet with her next week, and the Commissioner with party colleagues, and I think Carol, you may have already met with the Equality Commissioner. So, but that's in a party point of view. But I think as a committee, then I think we should write it to ask what the time frame will be and the process and the scope of how they will feedback their understanding of how the Supreme Court ruling will apply here in Northern Ireland. Carol, did you want back in?
No.
No. Okay. Okay. Are we all agreed? Go ahead.
On minutes then, what is the minute changing to reflect?
Do you have a
Because there was
words?
no agreement,
Yeah.
I believe, last week that we were going to rename the inquiry. I still believe this committee shouldn't rename the inquiry. For obvious reasons, I don't think you should have an inquiry and then after it's finished, turn around and change the goalposts. And the last point, Chair, that I did raise regarding your comments on Monday, you know, you don't put legislation in place and then ask for clarification from the courts after it. You should have your homework done before you do that.
Timothy, I know how legislation works, and I know that if you were bringing something forward, you would have to look at the competency of it that we could legislate within this Assembly. I know how these things work.
Your
Okay.
comments on Monday
No,
are different to that.
No. Okay. Go ahead, please, Brian.
Well, just to clarify how the matter of the inquiry. What I was proposing is that the title of the report, would be a comparative study of equality legislation in Northern Ireland and elsewhere or other jurisdictions. So I accept that the inquiry was branded under the heading of gaps in equality legislation, but I was proposing a title for the actual inquiry report.
No, I know, and that's understood, and I thought that had a lot of merit. Go ahead. Do you have a
There was
one
no
of words?
objection to that.
can I suggest,
Thank you.
because I drafted the minutes and I may have gone slightly beyond where the committee feels it agreed. So can I suggest a form of words here which says, the committee discussed the possibility of retitling the inquiry to more closely reflect the content of the draft final report, and then to say, and would revisit this at a future meeting.
Is everybody agreed? Any objections? No. Okay. So subject to that amendment to the minutes, then are members content that I go ahead and sign these when they? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you, members. So moving on then. So. That was the only matter arising. So then we're going to move on to our first oral briefing then. So the Northern Ireland Assembly EU Affairs Manager is coming before us, and you'll find the clerk's brief at page 16, and you'll find the briefing paper on pages 17 to 24. So we've Sean McGann, who is the EU Affairs Manager, and we've Claire Milliken, the EU Affairs Officer. Okay, so thank you, ladies, and apologies for the delay in bringing you in. So thank you for your submission. It was nice and straightforward. So we like that at committee, very straightforward and very timely. So appreciate that. So if you'd like to go ahead and make some opening remarks, we'll then go. We'll invite members in to ask questions.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.
And thanks for inviting us along today. So I'm glad to hear the paper was straightforward. That's always good to know. So I am just going to make a few remarks around common frameworks, and as you say, Chair, happy to take some questions afterwards. So common frameworks are being developed in policy areas which were previously governed by EU law and which intersect with devolved competence. And essentially, common frameworks set out how intergovernmental working is going to take place in each defined policy area. They're purely intra-UK arrangements, and they're designed to be flexible enough to take account of the differing needs of the devolved administrations. There's a set of common principles for the development of common frameworks, and these were agreed by the UK and the devolved governments back in 2017. They say that they aim to ensure a common approach is taken by devolved administrations in these policy areas, and common frameworks are established to enable the functioning of the UK internal market while acknowledging policy divergence, ensure compliance with international obligations, ensure the UK can negotiate, enter into and implement new trade agreements and international treaties, enable the management of common resources, administer and provide access to justice in cases with a cross-border element, and safeguard the security of the UK. Responsibility for the whole Common Frameworks process lies with Pat McFadden MP, who is the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster and the Minister for Intergovernmental Relations. Each Common Framework is developed by the respective UK Government Department, working jointly with their devolved counterparts. Most of the frameworks are currently operating on an interim basis, and I have included a diagram, Chair, in your pack just to show you the flow of the process. Once a common framework has undergone initial joint policy development, it's provisionally approved by all the relevant ministers. The framework is then published, and at that stage then parliamentary scrutiny takes place across the UK committees in Parliament and the devolved legislatures. Following that parliamentary scrutiny, the frameworks are then reviewed and updated to take account of any feedback given during that scrutiny process, and they receive final ministerial clearance prior to being republished. Common frameworks obviously interact with the Internal Market Act, and that Act was amended to acknowledge the role of common frameworks. So members will be aware that the Internal Market Act operates on the basis of two what they're called market access principles. Essentially, these provide that regulations in one part of the UK should not discriminate against goods from another, and that goods sold legally in one part of the UK can therefore be sold in any other part of the UK. Within the Common Frameworks process, there is provision for some policies to be excluded from these market access principles, and there is a defined exclusion process where any government can propose to have something excluded from the market access principles. And a previous example of this was single-use plastics in Scotland, where a ban was implemented there in advance of the UK-wide ban on single-use plastics. Due to the differing devolution settlements, each devolved administration participates in a different number of common frameworks, and for Northern Ireland we have the largest number, and that is 32 common frameworks. The Committee for the Executive Office and the Executive Office itself has oversight of the Common Frameworks programme, while the Assembly Statutory Committees are the bodies that scrutinise each framework in the respective areas. The Executive has previously indicated that frameworks not only require sign-off by the respective Minister, but also sign-off by the First Minister and Deputy First Minister. To date, only one common framework has been fully implemented in the UK, and this is the Hazardous Substances Planning Framework, but the majority of the other frameworks have been operating in provisional mode. And I've put a list there in the paper as well, Chair, and you'll note the ERA, most of them lie within the ERA remit. I know that the Executive Office provided you recently with a status update on each of the frameworks. It had been anticipated that most of them would be finished in spring of this year, and to be fair, the whole process has been moved, the goalposts have been moved in terms of time frame. It's been much longer than it was anticipated when the programme was originally conceived, so there's obviously been some time lag in that. 20 of the 32 frameworks have been scrutinised by all legislatures, and these are at various stages of progression towards full implementation. There is one difference in the figures from TEO that were provided to you recently, in that the ERA Committee has recently finalised its scrutiny of the emissions trading framework. And very briefly, Chair, before I close on that, a couple of other developments just to draw to the Committee's attention. Obviously, the Withdrawal Agreement Joint Committee met this week. The UK-EU Summit is on the 19th of May. Before summer recess, the review of the Windsor Framework, led by Lord Murphy, is due to complete. The Independent Monitoring Panel for the Internal Market is also going to report to the Secretary of State before the summer, by the 30th of June, that is. The review of the Internal Market Act is also to be completed before summer 2025, and then looking forward, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement review, the first review of it will happen next year in 2026. So that's a very quick gallop through the paper there, Chair. I'm very happy to take any questions or provide any clarifications.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you have anything to add at this point, Claire? No. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm struck by the timelines in terms of the indicative dates, and some of them go back as, I think, October 2020. And at the top of that page, well, it's on our pack, it's page 21, but the common frameworks which apply to Northern Ireland, that page with the table. So it is useful to see then that the scrutiny under the first one there, for example, scrutiny completed in March 2025. Be useful to know when the scrutiny was completed for all the other. You haven't included that. if you know what I mean, because I'm conscious that a lot of that, to me,
Yeah.
with all due respect in the world, a lot of the rest of that, those paragraphs looks like civil servants speak, that finalising the review, we're close to completion, we're
Yeah.
looking at the recommendations and stuff. So
Yeah.
what does that actually mean? Like, how close are we? How long have since the scrutiny ended? Where is the hold up in terms of getting these signed off?
Yeah, so as I say, Chair, the principles for establishing the whole process for common frameworks was back in 2017, so obviously quite a while ago. And there was considerable time lag at that point. I think the process had been envisaged that it would move a lot more quickly.
Yeah.
Some of the delay, and not all of it, is down to whenever there was no Northern Ireland Executive, a lot of the work then couldn't be done because the Executive had previously stated that it needed to be signed off not just by the portfolio minister but also the First and Deputy First Ministers. That text, as you say, sounds like civil service speak because it is civil service speak. It's taken from the TEO document. I just amended the first one because that is has been a change since the paper
Yes.
the TEO provided to you. So in terms of when they were variously approved, before the last hiatus of the Assembly, ERA had done quite a few they had completed quite a few of theirs, and they had published committee position papers on various aspects of these. So sort of all along they've been moving along. ERA and Health probably were the first ones to sort of start seeing the common frameworks coming through.
Yeah.
As I say, only hazardous substances, which fell to infrastructure, is the only one that has been completed. So they've all been sort of dribs and drabs really.
Yes.
Along the process, and there are a number where there are, I think it's 4, are still at a very early stage of development. So it has been very slow moving. As I say, some of it was delayed because of there was no sign off from the Executive, and unless there's sign off from all the administrations, they can't progress. So the other administrations were sort of in a band where we're at a standstill, really waiting for sign off to come from Northern Ireland.
What seems to be the problem then with the sign off? The final sign off.
I think
Is there a point in the system? Are these sitting on somebody's desks? The point.
to be fair, that's probably a question better directed to the TEO officials who would be able to give you a bit more information.
Okay.
I mean, I think once the various committees and all the legislatures do their scrutiny and they have an opportunity to feedback any comments or reviews, there obviously, it depends if the committee has a lot of comments or alternatively there's been stakeholder comments. The common framework there has to be reviewed and finalised on the back of maybe to incorporate and reflect some of those comments. If there hasn't been any comment from the committees, and theoretically it'd be a much more straightforward process to move to finalisation. But as I say, I mean, TEO would be able to tell you exactly whose desk they're sitting on.
Okay, thank you. Just a final one for me at this point. So some of these, well, all of these issues are obviously evolving issues, like air quality, for example, just the one that pops up on my screen here.
Yeah.
So what is the mechanism for the devolved administrations with London, for example, just keeping these under review and, keeping them timely and, in terms of new scientific evidence, for example? So what's the process for keeping them fresh?
Yeah, so the Interministerial Standing Committee is the intergovernmental structure which sort of leads on these. So that's where those discussions between all the relevant ministers would be taking place on these individual policy areas. So that's where the sort of, as you say, the fresh discussions of if things are moving. And to be fair, for the 4 areas that are still at early stages of development, I think that's what's happened in those areas. Because one of them is, for example, mutual recognition of professional qualifications, and that's still an area where UK government is in discussions with the EU around how that's going to work. So that's probably creating a bit of a delay in that particular one. So those kind of conversations are very much live at that Interministerial Standing Committee, and that's where the ministers from all the regions and from the UK government are getting together to have the live discussions on these. So that's the kind of structure that works underneath the Cabinet Office in terms of the more day-to-day minutiae, I guess, of the discussions.
Okay, I have a couple more questions, but I'll let others in
Yeah, no
case
problem, no
or if they
worries.
don't ask them, I'll come back. Deputy Chair, please.
Right,
Thanks.
thanks, Chair. Thank you for this. You said that part of the delay, if you like, is because there was no Assembly and, more importantly in this case, the Executive, because of this requires Executive Office sign-off. What were the other administrations doing during that time?
Well, the frameworks are in operation provisionally. That's the sort of technical term they call them. So they're operating to all intents and purposes already. And just on the, I could actually back to the chair's point about a lot of them have built-in sort of monitoring and review and those kind of things. Some of them have boards or project groups or that kind of thing that keep them under review. So they were operating in provisionally, so they were still operating while they were awaiting sign-off.
Yeah. Well, we've been back how long now? So why, you know, it goes back to an argument and a discussion which we've had a lot of times. There must have been a big long book of day one decisions that needed to be taken. Very few of them have been taken. Civil servants were preparing all of these actions for the day when the executive returned. Maybe it's less of a question for you and more a question for the committee to ultimately write to the executive office and ask, what have you been doing during this time with regards to these? But have you any insight as to why, since we're back over a year now, these things are still not finalised?
No, I know that TO, as I say, had mentioned in their correspondence to yourselves that they expected things to be signed off by spring, but there seems to have been a bit, obviously we're in coming into May now, so.
And all of them, and it's a two-step process. They're cleared first of all by the individual departments and they've been scrutinised by the committees. Mm-hmm. So that bit is all, on this table, all of that work has been done. So
yes,
these are
the majority of them, not
the majority
all
of them.
Yeah.
So these are all sitting in TEO. They're not sitting back in ERA or other committees.
I'm not sure. So obviously the wider executive sign off incorporates both the responsible minister and the First Minister and Deputy First Minister. So I'm not sure, you know, if one part of that has been done and not the other.
Yes, but when you say scrutiny is completed,
yeah, the Assembly's role in it, if you like, is finished. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, okay, Brian, please.
Well, I'm going to continue on the same theme. Thank you, Claire and Shauna, for your attendance today. So I'm not getting the clarity that we'd like on the common frameworks. Obviously, this is not unique to Northern Ireland. They're across all 4 parts of the United Kingdom, and it results in matters coming back from EU powers, and it aims to maintain the integrity of the UK internal market, and different frameworks will apply to different parts. So, yeah, but only one that applies to Northern Ireland is fully implemented. So, are there can you say more? Are there hold-ups within other jurisdictions as well, or do you think the hold-ups are only at the Northern Ireland end? And how are there dates at which certain ones will be signed off? Can you tell us any more?
I suppose the challenge for me answering that question is in terms of the information that's put out by the governments on the Common Frameworks process. So the .gov.uk website has a list of the Common Frameworks and the documents that have been published, but you know, there's nothing published. There was a yearly report about how the Common Frameworks process was working. That was a requirement under the Withdrawal Act. Those aren't required to be statutorily published anymore, so we don't sort of, the flow of information to let us know what's happening and where the delays are is really, from my perspective, a little bit piecemeal, and it's sort of you're garnering little nuggets of information from different sources. There's no sort of key place where you can go and say, where are these at? You know, that these 10 are done. It's drawing pieces of information from colleagues in Scotland are being told, and colleagues in Wales are being told, and that kind of thing. So it's pulling together the up-to-date information that we're getting from disparate sources, if you like. So unfortunately, it's very difficult to say, out of these 32, you know, this one's going to be done next week and this one's going to be done next. It's very difficult to get information. There used to be a Common Frameworks Committee in the House of Lords, and they published a couple of very good reports around. They were less interested in the minutiae of the policy areas, but the whole process about how the frameworks worked. And one of their criticisms, for example, was the transparency of the decision making and how it was working, and what the whole, you know, that was a previous criticism of that committee, that it was very difficult to get information and therefore very difficult for stakeholders to, you know, feed into the process and that kind of thing. So it has been difficult to get up-to-date information about how the wider process is working.
Mm-hmm. But it's a Cabinet Office, which is
it is a Cabinet Office responsibility, yeah.
Okay. Unfortunately, it doesn't sound like we can get any further clarity on that. 2 other questions, Chair. in terms of the meeting yesterday,
Yes.
then of the joint committee, and the progress made there regarding personal deliveries of parcels
Yep.
directly to customers, and well, I recognise that as progress. It's a matter been raised by me when they receive a package that they order online and they find a customs declaration either on the envelope or enclosed inside, and why should that be necessary? Ordering something as a customer from within the UK, coming from a company in GB. Can you say more about the changes which are coming into effect, following on from Safeguarding the Union agreement? And obviously we would like that to also apply to business, from business to business supplies that are staying within the UK, and that is a work in progress. So again, can you clarify, can you say more about what the agreements yesterday, which come into force, is the first tomorrow, 1st of May? Yes.
Yeah. The arrangements for parcels, essentially, the idea is that the information that would have to be provided on the declaration will be, the government has said they're going to have the number of data fields that a sender needs to complete in terms of making the declaration. And the idea is that a lot of that information is already commercially available information that the company will have anyway. And so the idea is that they're to be utilising information they've already had to provide, for example, to HMRC or that kind of thing. So they're not having to sort of gather lots of extra information to put on the labels. There's also changes around the rebate. I don't know if you're from, whenever they were sending, they had to then apply for a rebate to the UK if it was proved that the parcel was staying within the UK, and then claim that money back. There's going to be changes around that rebate situation as well. Although, off the top of my head, I think that for parcels up until June, I think things will continue around the rebate will continue, and then there'll be a change after that. So those are the two main changes. I'm not an expert now on parcels by any stretch of the imagination, but the idea is that the data needed to do the parcel sending is going to be less, and that the rebate will be changed as well.
Right. Okay, no, and it's important work. At the end of the day, the arrangements agreed to by Boris Johnson, to go back to that era, did not respect Northern Ireland's place as part of the United Kingdom, and it's a job to ensure our place within the UK internal market is respected. The last question I want to ask, Chair, is just the volume. This is such a complicated issue, and you're liaising with people in Whitehall and in Brussels, and keeping track of everything. Do you feel you have enough support within the staff team that you have? And I appreciate you're working with the Democratic Scrutiny Committee as well. I'm just mindful of the complexity of this matter, and it's important that it is resourced and that we are driving this issue forward and highlighting it with relevant authorities. So, I mean, do you feel you have sufficient resources for the work that your department is doing?
I mean, I feel a little bit uncomfortable answering that question in this forum, Chair. Claire obviously works in the office with me, and very good she is too. But we do work to support the Democratic Scrutiny Committee as well as all other committees. It is a very complex matter. We obviously have our colleagues in Research and Information Services as well. So that's probably
what staff team do you have for the?
It's Claire and I.
Right, two of you.
Yes.
Aye.
But we're very good.
I don't doubt it, but I am mindful of the complexity of this work.
It is complex, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, Timothy, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. I suppose just a couple of questions regarding the common framework. So we have 32 in Northern Ireland, and you said that's Northern Ireland, obviously, because of the Windsor framework and sharing the land border, we would have the most. How many do Wales and Scotland have for the devolved?
I don't have it off the top of my head. I think it was 22 and 17. I think Wales had the least. I can come back to you with the exact numbers, but yeah, it was Scotland had slightly more, and then Wales.
So Northern Ireland has 32, and 20 of them require Windsor framework text. I had asked previously at committee, when we were talking about common frameworks before, I would like to see the common frameworks prior to Windsor framework text, and then after Windsor framework text. So obviously there's a raft of these haven't been signed off. They must be available somewhere online. Is that correct?
Yeah, they're all published online. Yeah, so they're all called provisional, but they are there. Yeah, you can have a look at them.
Yeah, where's that at?
That's on the gov.uk website. If you just look on the website and do common frameworks, but I'm happy to send the link, Chair, to the committee.
So the common frameworks that are online, yes, they might be provisional. The 20 that require Windsor framework text, has that already been included?
In some of them there's references. Some of them, for example, have references to obviously the protocol, which obviously needs to be now updated. So it depends when they were drafted really, but most of them are have been drafted a number of years ago, so any reference within is to the protocol as was.
And is there an archive somewhere where I could access what the common frameworks look like before the protocol, before the Windsor framework, comparing that to what they are now?
I don't know that because of the time frame for them, most of them probably would have been after 2019, so they probably would have all had the protocol text in them at that point. Hazardous substances as the earliest one that was approved. I'd need to check when that was approved. That might not have had the original text of that, might not have had a reference to the protocol, but as most of them have been done post 2019, most of them will have some reference to the protocol within.
Yeah. So I would still like to see, so if the 2019 ones and the ones after were produced with the protocol in it, and now they've been updated to potentially have the Windsor framework, I would still like sight of what changes has taken place to insert the Windsor framework text. Something that's been asked before at committee, and if that's possible to produce that, I certainly would encourage, I would like to see it. So regarding the 20 that require Windsor framework text, do you know what 20 of the 32 that is?
The paper I think that was sent to you from TEO did delineate which ones. I don't have that paper with me, unfortunately, but it did delineate which ones say that they are awaiting Windsor framework text. Some of them won't, because obviously some of them, like I think public procurement, for example, is one that doesn't. There are a few that obviously won't have the text, but I don't have the TEO table with me, unfortunately, but it should have delineated, I think.
No. Number 7, is that?
23 of them.
So them's the ones that have the Windsor framework.
Annex A, it's on page 36 of the members' pack.
No, that's very helpful. If you could provide the link to where we can find these online,
Happy to.
and also provide the old copies, if that's still accessible, it would certainly be very helpful then to compare what changes that the Windsor framework, the addition of Windsor framework text has made to the frameworks.
No problem. I'll certainly see what's available, and certainly happy to provide that to the committee. No problem.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Anya, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I know, Shawnee, you touched on the mutual recognition of professional qualifications there. Given the fact that it is lagging so far behind at the minute, what mitigations are in place in the interim until a common framework is reached?
Well, I think the mutual recognitions of qualifications obviously within the UK is working fine at the minute. I think the complicating factor for that one is if something is agreed with the EU and the UK's position, then might need to just be amended to reflect that on a UK-wide basis. That would influence then what happens in the common framework. So at the minute, everything intra-UK, common framework is only within the UK. Everything's working as it previously has there. So I think that's why there's been a delay in that particular one about finalising, because the UK policy position is just not 100% set, because I think they're waiting to see if something is agreed with the EU. So in terms of on the ground and, you know, the reality of the matter, nothing has changed on that. So there are no sort of interim arrangements, if you like, at the minute, or mitigations that are needed at the minute. So depending on if something is agreed with the EU, that would potentially change the UK-wide position, and therefore then have an impact on how that would work for Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales.
And in terms of, I suppose, our workforce or anybody that is an overseas worker, so anybody that comes from an EU country or even outside the EU, they can still go through the normal processes pre-Brexit, I'm assuming?
The Trade and Cooperation Agreement, which is in place at the minute, does allow individual areas, so individual sectoral fields, to arrangements to be made between the UK and the EU for individual fields of industry. So while that doesn't cover everything, so if there was a special need for recognition of qualifications in a certain sector, I don't want to pick one off the top of my head, but there is provision for that to be addressed through the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. So that's what sort of governs it at the minute.
Okay, thank you, Sean. And just a final one,
Yeah.
maybe I'm playing devil's advocate here, but have you any idea as to when that specific common framework will be, a finalisation will be reached on it? No. And is there any timeline as to how long it could, go on for?
I guess it depends sort of what sort of background work and sort of preparatory work might have been done within the Department for the Economy, which is the lead department on that particular one. So no, I don't know.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Very diplomatic answer. Harry, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Shauna, Claire. Good to see you again. In terms of the review, Shauna, maybe the review commissioned 9th of January 25 finds of the review will be provided to the Secretary of State, laid in Parliament and sent to the Speaker. Have we any idea of how that's progressing or what's in that review, being like 4 months in by Lord Murphy Trophy?
Yes, so Lord Murphy has said that it will be completed before the UK Parliament summer recess. And as you rightly say, it'll be laid in Parliament and sent to the Speaker. It's not statutorily required, but there is the government has an expectation that there'll be an assembly debate on the report, and that debate would happen in advance of a debate in Parliament. In terms of the content, I don't know. Obviously, you'll know that Lord Murphy was over not long ago and met with various parties to discuss their point of view, and the latest update from the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland said that Lord Murphy had been speaking to stakeholder groups as well. So I'm guessing the evidence has been gathered. I haven't heard anything to the contrary, so the expectation still is that we'll see it before the summer.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Go ahead, please.
Just one brief question. I'm not sure we'll be able to answer this or not, but the EU and the United Kingdom have a trade summit scheduled for the 19th of May. Is there a predicted impact of that in as much as it looks as if that trade agreement is going to harmonise and simplify a great deal? That's the goal. And in those circumstances, is there any prediction as to how much of that it will impact on all of these agreements? Would it make them easier or more difficult?
So on common frameworks, do you mean?
Yes.
So if the Labour government obviously very clearly stated in its manifesto that SPS, Sundry Phytosanitary Agreement, is one of their goals. Yeah. If that is the case and GB as a result does align more closely to EU standards, that has the potential to ameliorate the differentiation that Northern Ireland experiences. So that could have an impact then on some of the ERA common frameworks within that. It's very hard to know, obviously, the detail of which of them might fall by the wayside then and not be required. But that would be an expectation that if there is closer alignment between GB and EU on those agri-environment rules, that would ameliorate the situation in terms of the differential between GB and NI on some of those rules.
So unpicking the damage of Brexit on the 19th of May.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other indications. Okay, so thank you, ladies, again for coming before committee. I really appreciate everything, not just for this committee, but the work you do. I'm sure it's very challenging.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So will we just do maybe, guys, please? Will we just do a discussion on any potential actions arising from this? So obviously there was the link to the common framework section of the gov.uk. That's going to be forward, but was there anything more substantive that we spoke to? No.
The EU Affairs Manager said that she would see what information was available in terms of prior versions.
Yeah.
Oh,
to
yes.
pick up on Mr. Gaston's point, to see what was available in terms of prior versions and look at that. And if that's not complete, then we can write to the department and ask for copies, if there are copies available, and for copies of what the preceding version was. So if they're not in the public domain, we can seek them.
Okay. Is that okay? Go ahead, please, Brian.
In terms of the changes to customer parcels, agreed this week and coming into force tomorrow, it's just to know what the publicity campaign will be for that, both within Northern Ireland but with companies in GB. Because as I say, it is a matter raised with me by various people, why. Well, first of all, we've had a number of companies in the past that stopped supplying Northern Ireland. I'd like to think that has improved over time, but there is still extra time when they're doing a customs declaration, which will not now be required. So whether we write to our own department and ask them, our own officers, about the publicity around this, as I say, both for the public here in Northern Ireland, but I suppose we need supply companies in GB to be properly informed. So whether we need to write to the Cabinet Office, I suppose. But how is the communication happening with those companies in GB that are supplying customers in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Fair point, particularly for Royal Mail, and indeed other suppliers. They're all about making profits, and if you can make more profits by coming back into the Northern Ireland market and all of that, then they should be encouraged.
And some of them may be doing over administration,
yes,
which is not now required.
Okay, thank you. Harry's indicated there. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. I would take it Lord Murphy's review then won't be debated here until September, October time, would that be right?
Yeah, it depends on when it gets through.
Yeah,
I suppose we're right up into the first week of July, so summer recess, so maybe. Yeah. I don't know. I think the Windsor Framework Committee will be the ones help the organise in terms of committee motion. Okay, no, that's a good point. Okay, members, so as I said earlier, we were meant to then have a briefing from departmental officials, but that's been deferred. So I'm going to move on to correspondence. With it being just come back from Easter recess, there's a lot to get through, guys, so bear with me. Okay, so you'll find the correspondence in your packs, pages 53 to 60, and there's a proposed responses in the table pack, if I've said that right. So just going to draw your attention to a number of matters. So 8.3, we've received individual correspondence in terms of a request for HIA redress, the HIA redress scheme to be extended. So you'll find this in pages 69 to 70. The committee has received further correspondence from an individual in relation to the HIA redress scheme as set out in your pack. Just to remind you that we previously considered this correspondence from this individual and agreed responses at meetings on the 26th of March, 2nd of April and 9th of April, and just to advise that the committee team sought the individual's consent to forward their correspondence to the Executive Office for a response which was actioned on the 8th of April. So I'm just asking you to note this item of correspondence and seek agreement to issue the draft response in the tabled papers pack, and are members content with this response? Okay. 8.4, Committee for Finance, Retail NI Survey Report. So I'm going to refer you to pages 71 to 73 of your meeting pack. Just to advise that the Committee for Finance has sent the committee a copy of the Retail NI Survey Report, and this is a survey, results from a survey from Retail NI, a call for action, a 5-point plan to tackle the cost of doing business crisis. Retail NI has highlighted that the Executive needs to immediately recall the High Street Task Force and to start implementation of its proposed 5-year High Street reconstruction plan along with all 14 recommendations. The work of the High Street Task Force concluded with the presentation of the report to junior ministers in March 2022. The scope of the 14 recommendations spanned the responsibilities across a number of departments. So I'm going to ask members to note this item of correspondence and to seek your agreement to write to the department to ask if there are any immediate plans to re-establish the High Street Task Force and what progress has been made on the 14 recommendations to date.
Sorry,
Go ahead,
Chair,
please.
just by way of information, this is an area that I've been questioning the
Okay.
Executive Office on, by written question. The response which I got was that they have effectively handed the issue over to each of the departmental
Yes.
ministers to respond to, and I've now asked them to provide me with the responses that the ministers have given them back. It's very clear that it's just disappeared into a black hole, and it was all sound and very little vision when it came to a high street task force,
Yes.
which has achieved precious little, and it certainly should be a top priority for our questioning when and if the junior ministers ever appear in this committee room.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I suppose they built up expectations that the Executive Office
Absolutely.
would take this forward. Okay, so item 8.5, an individual has sent in a complaint regarding the redevelopment of Mandela Hall at Queen's University Belfast. So refer you to pages 74 to 82 of your pack. Just to advise, the committee has received correspondence from an individual in relation to a complaint about Queen's University Belfast's conduct in relation to the redevelopment of Mandela Hall and the use of public funds with a focus on its management structure, booking processes, event approvals and staffing before and after redevelopment. So just asking members to note this item of correspondence and seek your agreement to issue the draft response, which we'll find in the tabled papers pack. So I'm just going to ask the clerk to speak to this item, please.
So you'll see that we've been copied into, we haven't really been directly addressed, but we've been copied into a number of things. One of them is a freedom of information request, which hasn't been addressed to us, but we've been copied in. So the committee will want to think about how to respond to this. So there's the table papers has that in there. So it's basically just noting that they've considered the correspondences dated the 8th and 9th. That we noted the issues they raised, but it's outside the remit of the committee's scope of remit, and noted the matters may be pursued through the QUB processes directly. The committee for the Executive Office obviously thanks them for their correspondence, but we can't really be of any further assistance, and that the committee team will follow up in relation to being copied into the FOI to provide some assistance in relation to that. But that's not a matter for the committee, but it's just to say that it will be taken forward outside of here.
Yeah. Content?
Great.
Okay, thank you. 8.7, individuals contacted the committee in relation to, they're highlighting the failure of the Irish State inquiry to include evidence from HIA victims and survivors from Church of Ireland and homes belonging to other Protestant denominations, and I would refer you to page 84 of your meeting pack for this. So I'm just asking you to note this item of correspondence and to seek your agreement to respond to the individual, thanking them for the correspondence, explaining that the Irish inquiry is outside this Executive Office Committee's remit, and that there will be an opportunity for any interested parties to provide evidence as part of our committee stage of the forthcoming Truth, Recovery and Redress Bill, and a draft letter is included in the tabled papers pack. I'm not sure whether it's necessary to go through that. Okay, but I think that this individual has liaised with a number of members, and I suppose it's up to individuals to respond in their own capacity, but we will ensure that the clerk then goes back from the committee. Everybody content? Okay, so the next item, 8.10, I'm going to refer you to page 93 of your pack. So just to advise, the committee has received correspondence from an individual regarding their concern about failure to include evidence of abuse at institutions run by the Church of Ireland and Protestant denomination in the Irish State inquiry. Very similar issue here. So just asking you to note this correspondence and to seek your agreement to respond to this individual, thanking them for their correspondence, explaining that the Irish inquiries outside our committee's remit, and again that there will be an opportunity for interested parties to provide evidence as part of our scrutiny of the Truth, Recovery and Redress Bill. And again, similar response. Yep. Okay. 8.12, the Executive Office has responded to our committee correspondence of the 31st of May regarding the TO budget 2025-26, and refer you to pages 102 to 142 of the meeting pack. Just to say that this response has been received regarding budget allocations, and to advise that the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls Directorates, since its inception in December 2021 until 31st of March 2025, £811,367 has been spent on Strategic Investment Board costs, and a breakdown of the costs have been provided. SIB continues to provide support to ending violence against women and girls on specific areas of work where contractors' specialist skills are required. The final 2024-25 budget allocations for SIB have also been provided. Breakdown of council total funding under the Local Change Fund for 15 months to March 2026 has also been provided. Each local council has been funded to create an individual local violence against women and girls change fund for their own council area. Individual councils make the decision on grant recipients in accordance with individual grant processes. The Executive Office approved the guidance issued to applicants. Further information on the Good Relations Fund. So that's the end of that point. And then we've also received further information on the Good Relations Fund, breakdown of the costs for the rights, identity, language and identity competitions, breakdown of the operating costs for the 3 overseas bureaus, details of the equality impact on the draft budget 2025-26, travel budget for the department, and delays to members' questions have also been provided. So any comments on that? That was quite a substantive response. Oh, sorry, Carol, please go ahead.
Thank you, Paula. So I asked this question some months ago, if you remember, because the Strategic Investment Board, the figure that's included, is that for the staff, SIB staff, who are based in TEO, who are working on the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy? I mean, because it's still not clear to me. Or what's it for?
Yes, no, that's a very fair question. It's a very substantial amount. We can go back and clarify that if that would be useful. Go ahead, please, Clark.
Sorry, it was just to say that at this very moment, I'm just looking to see if I can find a copy of the text of the letter that we sent, so I can tell you exactly what we asked for. Yes. So if you just bear with me 1 second, I'll search and I'll tell you exactly what we asked for.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead, Brian, just while the clerk's looking for that. Do you want to raise another matter on the
is it the case then that, I mean, SIB is brought in almost like an outside consultant, you know, to work on a particular area that needs a staff resource for a short period of time, you know, to create this the strategy? Because I presume I'm not sure what the staff were doing before they were brought in to do the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, but that would be my reading of it.
Yeah.
You know, I presume that, and this was, well, has that? Are they still working on the outworking of the strategy?
Different projects, you know, different things to work on that come before them. That's what I would imagine it would be.
If you want to have a look at page 102, I'm just getting to this point. If you want to have a look at page 102 of your pack, yeah.
Continues
It's not that clear. It's not that clear.
Including staff costs for those who are seconded.
Sure. So I rushing this is before your time, but I specifically have been asking. So the staff that were recruited, SIB staff were recruited to advance the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. Okay. So that was before devolution was restored. So I wanted the costs of that. I also asked, were the same staff still being paid by SIB to work in TEO as part of the ongoing work? And if so, what is the total cost? And then the rest is probably in the correspondence in terms of what money has been spent, to whom, for what. And I don't understand why there's a bit of ambiguity around this. So if we could just be so specific that they need to answer those points, I would really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. The clerk's just speaking to Nick here. Just 1 wee second to see what they're...
On page 141, so what we asked for was clarification on running costs for the Strategic Investment Board, including staff costs for those staff that were seconded to work on the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, and to ask whether those staff are still seconded to the department. And then the other thing we asked for was further detail on running costs for the Strategic Investment Board more widely. So if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying the response we've received is not sufficiently clear in addressing those
it's
things?
Not. It's
Okay.
not.
That's right.
So we'll go back and ask for more detail.
Please.
Yeah, more breakdown and more detail. And
And from the date, Roisin, if you could be specific, sorry to interrupt you, but if you could say the date that SIB staff were recruited or brought in by the department to work on this strategy. So from the date that they were brought in until current day, if they're still working there, and how much cost of SIB staff to work on this strategy has been from start until current day.
Just while you've got your pen on paper there, we still haven't received the response to my query about how much money's been spent in terms of the mother and baby research and structures. That's outstanding for months as well. Claire, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is the same point we're making, but I suppose it's a general kind of conversation about how the money's being spent and how effective in with that, like I was at Women's Aid just previous to this meeting, and they're telling me that we're having conferences about violence against women and girls rather than just giving the money to the police so that the police can go out and stop people breaching non-molestation orders. Now, I'm sure people have opinions on how it's spent, but I maintain that this strategy is not going to be effective because we're just ticking boxes and throwing money to demonstrate we're doing something rather than actually tackling the issue. So.
Yeah, no, very fair point. Go ahead, please.
Sorry, Chair, yes, just to drill down further into that point, the amount of money that was distributed to the district councils in respect of this seems to have been given to them and to distribute in accordance with the council's grant-making decisions. I find that very concerning, and again, I think we certainly, I would want to know how individual councils have spent that money. Was there a common framework standard set out for them to do that? And certainly, it's a 15-month period. We will definitely need to see an evaluation of the work. And picking up on Claire's point, I hope councils weren't running conferences, but they were actually pushing this money down into the frontline services, either through PCSPs or other organisations on the ground to deliver this. So I'm very concerned about the amount of money that just seems to be handed over to local government.
Yeah, just on that point, Deputy Chair, having been on secondment in Belfast City Council for a period, there are a lot of officials, there are a lot of officers in there, and I would like to think that a lot of this isn't siphoned off for actual staff costs, that this is actually going to the front line. So I would like to know, further to your point, whether there was a stipulation of the maximum amount of this allocation that could be used for council staff, as opposed, 10% or whatever, but I wouldn't like to think it would be anything more than that. Timothy, you looking in?
Yeah, just further to Stuart's point, once again shows you, and I've made this point a couple of times in committee, where we get money that's given to councils without any real oversight.
Absolutely.
Time and time again this happens. I've seen it coming forward to Mid and East Dunton, where this money has arrived in, and then they make up what they're going to, yes, as they go forward, come to some sort of agreement. It's almost as if the pot of money is given, council then decide how they want to spend it, and that's no oversight from this committee, from the executive office, whoever, to actually tackle the problems that the money was earmarked for.
Yep. Anya, please.
Yeah, Chair, and I suppose a supplementary point just on what everybody has said there. Could we possibly write out to each council just for a breakdown as to what they have allocated the money to date for, or possibly what pre-planning had they in place, as well as any ALBs that they've been already working with?
That's a good point. I think the pre-planning one's particularly good.
I'm sorry, could I ask the member just to repeat that again so I have the note? I'm sorry.
There we go. To write to each district council for a breakdown in relation to the monies allocated from TEO and what programmes that money has been allocated to, and has there been any, or was there any pre-planning done? Because I'm assuming each council will have some sort of a draft strategy or policy themselves in terms of ending violence against women. So I think the other points were well made as well. So
No, it's good. Okay.
It'd be interesting to know, did councils get a heads up to say this money was coming?
Did they bid for it?
Or was it a case of, right, here's a circular, this is what we're going to spend this money on, it's going to councils? Like, I know locally they're encouraging different groups to come forward to bid for this money, or, you know, community organisations.
You know,
That's what raises the concerns.
are they the
with
best
me.
placed?
Yeah, absolutely.
Brian, please.
Yeah, just, if reading the department, can we ask them what criteria for the funding were sent to councils for the local change fund, and also for the regional change fund as well? What criteria for funding?
Yep. Go ahead, please, Carol.
So, some of the work that Belfast City Council have done on the end and violence against women and girls has been exemplary. It has brought in young women who are very vulnerable, along with their youth leaders, and for me it's money well spent. I understand Claire's point completely, given the lack of resources around, community policing, and particularly around non-molestation orders. But we also need to remember that the PSNI got a whack of money off from this. Certainly the tackling paramilitaries, they got the money from tackling paramilitaries fund. So this was about empowerment and having different outcomes. It's not to say there isn't great work happening. There is. But for me, my big concern, just to have it in record, is I suspect the money paid to SIB is probably in the millions. And I would dare say that money could have went to extra officers to serve non-mall orders, and could have went to community and voluntary sector groups who are really struggling under tiny budgets but doing massive amounts of work. And I just think there's something inherently unfair about that, if that proves to be the case.
Totally. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so I'm just noting also then in that correspondence we did get some information back around the costs linked to the rights, language and identity competitions and stuff. So I think I'd raised that under strategic planning earlier, but we do have that. Right. Okay, members.
Point 9, just before we go off.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Regarding clarity and the delay in responding to questions.
Oh, yes.
Including written and oral questions from the department to members. There's no
No real answer.
No information, no. It just shows the frustration I have with the First and Deputy First Ministers trying to get any information out of them. Typified in that response and the contempt it shows.
Yeah, it doesn't really explain it. Okay, members, go back to the. Okay, so I think I've covered that. Okay, so. There were a couple of suggestions. You had also suggested possibly further to consider in addition to these questions and actions. So go back to the department and ask for further information and detailed breakdown. I think that's what Carol had mentioned there around the increase of EFAG costs and SIB costs from 2021-25. Further information on the £147,000 depreciation value and the £1,197,000 listed as other in the 2024-25 budget allocation for SIB, and then further information on the China Overseas Bureau and the £554,000 capital allocation for 24-25, a written briefing on and copies of any Section 75 screening exercises undertaken by key business areas impacted by the budget allocations once they are completed. Okay, so content with all those proposed actions? Okay, so 8.13, the Women's Policy Group NI Code Design Panel Membership. So refer you to pages 143 to 155 of your pack. So the committee has received correspondence from the Women's Policy Group NI in relation to the code design terms of reference for social inclusion strategies, and a copy of the terms of reference sent to members of that group in November 2020. The correspondence was also sent to the Communities Committee. So just to ask you to note this correspondence, seek your agreement for the clerk to engage with the clerk of the Committee for Communities, as DFC are the lead department regarding social inclusion strategies. Are we content? Okay, so 8.15, the Northern Ireland Office response to the committee correspondence from the 3rd of March in terms of reform of the Legacy Act. So we'll refer you to pages 159 to 162 of your meeting pack. So the committee has received correspondence from the NIO in response to committee correspondence of the 3rd of March regarding the reform of the Legacy Act. The NIO has referred the committee to the government's written response to the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee, which provides information regarding the government's approach to legacy reform. NIO officials have also outlined that they are available to privately brief the committee on legacy issues. So I'm just asking you to note this and to seek your agreement for the committee team, the clerk, to liaise with the NIO to look at possible dates for an oral evidence session and advise on the session format, whether it should be open or closed and the timings, etc. Go ahead, please, Carol. It's on this matter.
So I think it needs to be open session. I don't think it should be conditional. I mean, it's not like the legacy legislation was done in private. So my preference would be, I mean, the NIO need to get with the programme, in my opinion.
Okay.
You don't do private meetings when it comes to public scrutiny.
Okay, no problem. I think that some of the thinking from the committee clerk, and I would agree with it, would be if the relevant scrutiny committee in Westminster hasn't seen in formal session the proposed changes to the Legacy Act, but if they're in the public domain, then absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, so the NIO has suggested the close, but I totally agree that if it can be an open session, then so be it.
Yeah.
Okay, any other matters on this? Okay, so 8.18, the Office of the Mental Health Champion, so the response to our correspondence of the 25th of March regarding outstanding strategies, and I would refer you to pages 204 to 209 of your pack. Okay, so what we wrote was in relation to helping members better understand what describes a trauma-informed approach, and Siobhan O'Neill, the Mental Health Champion, has set out her principles on trauma-informed approach and its key principles. So just ask you to note this item and seek your agreement to forward the correspondence to the Department for information and to consider this correspondence as part of its preparations for the Truth, Recovery and Redress Bill. Agreed? Okay, so 8.19, Caleb's Cause, NI, Post-19, Special Educational Needs and Disabilities in Northern Ireland, page 110 of your pack. So the committee has received correspondence from Caleb's Cause requesting a formal meeting with the committee in relation to the organisations concerned about a lack of legislation adequate provision for post-19 special educational needs and disabilities in Northern Ireland. So I would ask you to note this and seek your agreement to forward the correspondence to the health and education committees and possibly communities to be to take forward the issues raised, as these are not within the remit of the Executive Office. So if you go to page 8 of the tabled pack, you'll find a draft letter of response. Clark, could you possibly talk to that there if you've got it in front of you?
I do.
Please.
It is just to say that the committee's considered the correspondence, and that obviously to clarify that what the committee's role is, which is to scrutinise the work of the Department for the Executive Office. And whilst the committee is very sympathetic to the issues that are raised, it is a matter outside the committee's remit. So, and basically just then to provide them with information to pursue the matter through the relevant committees and the departments. So we have initially here said the Assembly committees and the links to the Assembly committees, contact information, and if you're content, we can also provide information for contact for the relevant departments. I think some members may also have been approached directly about this.
Okay, Claire, did you want to speak on this item, please?
Yeah, no, it's just to add the Economy Committee in relation to this, given that currently post-19 would fall within their remit around education. But just to note as well, in respect of why they're maybe writing to the Executive Office Committee, they met with the First and Deputy First Minister in relation to this because they do feel it's quite a cross-cutting issue. And whilst there are very specific remits of the committees that we're going to send it to in the departments, they feel it needs more coordination, and maybe that's why they're coming from the Executive Office to hope that could be, encouraged. But that's a matter for those departments. So.
Okay, please go ahead, Timothy. Thank you.
And is the problem and the plight that they have, that correspondence has come here and it falls within potentially 3-4 departments. So I agree with Claire's point that the reason instead of going to 4 different departments have come here, I don't think that really changes what we can do about it.
Yes.
But I have every sympathy for them and what they're trying to do. Great cause, but having to go to 4 different ministers from a number of different parties is part of the problem that they're facing.
Right. Please go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, just in terms of our reply, just to clarify, our reply implies it's up to them to write to the relevant departments, but we're going to forward it on, is that right, to the committees? Or so should we let them know? It's just so that, are we putting the ball back in their court, or are we are going to take action? We were going to refer it on.
Yes.
So I think we should say to them, we have forwarded your correspondence on to the following committees, just to be helpful.
Oh yeah, no, we're not trying to be, we're just making sure that the relevant committees.
We're not batting it back to them, we actually are. But we should let them know that we've forwarded it on to those committees then. Yeah.
Yes, what we need to do is we need to ask them for their permission to forward it, and then we will forward it. But that will happen, we'll do that.
Right.
And we'll respond in those terms.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, 8.20, Victims and Survivors Consultation Form, introduction from Interim Chair. So I would refer you to pages 211 to 212. So just to advise that the committee has received correspondence from the Interim Chair of the Victims and Survivors Consultation Form confirming their appointment, providing an update to committee queries and welcoming the opportunity to engage with the committee. So just to ask you to note this and to seek your agreement to arrange, in the first instance, an informal meeting with the Chair and Deputy Chair to discuss the forum and forthcoming Truth, Recovery and Redress Bill.
That's not included.
Okay, and to arrange an oral evidence session with the Victims and Survivors Consultation Forum as part of the committee stage of the bill. So it's really just to get an update on that. Content? Yep. Mm-hmm. Okay, 8.23, the Executive Office Brussels Report, January to March 2025. You'll find this on pages 218 to 252 of your meeting pack. Just to advise that this progress report from the Office of the Northern Ireland Executive in Brussels from January to March 2025 has been received. Ask you to note this and to seek your agreement to include this as a relevant paper for the Overseas Bureau's oral evidence session next month. Do you have the date to hand there? Right, what date this is it?
It's hopefully going to be the 21st of May, but we just need to TBC that with
so
the three bureaus.
It's only a few weeks. Okay, thank you. Okay, 8.24 Ofcom statement for protecting children online. Refer you to pages 253 to 254 of the meeting pack. Just to note this correspondence and seek agreement to consider the final guidance when published as part of the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. Note the correspondence and seek your agreement to consider the final guidance when the strategy is published. Agreed? Okay, the Minister of Health we've received a response to our committee correspondence of the 31st of March regarding ending violence against women and girls strategy. Refer you to pages 255 to 257 of the pack. So just to advise that the Minister has outlined that while the Department of Health has not specifically bid for nor earmarked funding for the implementation of the End of Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, the work being progressed under the Domestic and Sexual Abuse strategy will contribute to the aims and delivery and aims of the EVAG strategy. So just to note this correspondence and seek your agreement to collate this in terms of response from departments to inform our ongoing work in this regard. And then linked to that, then the Minister of Finance has also responded to committee correspondence of the 31st of March. I'd refer you to pages 258 to 260 of your pack. Just to advise, the Finance Minister has also outlined that the Finance Department has supported the development of the EVAG strategy through its shared services, i.e. the Departmental Solicitor's Office and Commercial and Property Division, and has an integral role in delivering the strategy both as an employer and public service provider. So again, just to put that in with the correspondence for when we come back to this issue. So there are other items for note. I'm just going to ask the clerk just to go through those quickly. Thank you.
Excuse me. So item 8.2 is the 36th report of the Examiner of Statutory Rules. There's no rules for the committee's attention. 8.6 is TEO press release outlining how FMDFM are to become mentors as part of the Sisters NI programme to develop female leaders of the future. Item 8.8 is the TEO response to the committee correspondence of the 19th of March in relation to consultations. Item 8.9, which is TEO copy of the written ministerial statement on the Executive's legislation programme from 2024-25. Item 8.11 is the 37th report of the Examiner of Statutory Rules, and again there's no rules for the attention of this committee. 8.14 is a letter of thanks from Survivors Together following the evidence session that we had. The Next item is item 816, invitation from Ofcom to the connectivity seminar on the 15th of June 25, and members interested in attending can register using the links in the invitation. Item 8.17 is a copy of the corporate plan for 2025-26 to 2029-30 for the Electoral Commission. Item 8.21 is Department for Communities' response to the committee correspondence of the 25th of March regarding outstanding strategies. And item 8.22 is the TEO news release following the death of Pope Francis.
Okay, thank you, Clark. Any other? Go ahead, please.
Go back to 8.26. The response from the Finance Minister regarding ending violence against women and girls. A note that's listed here is developing an e-learning product to raise awareness within the department. Certainly I agree with that. I would like to see that once it's finished, and hopefully it's made in a way that it can be generally spread out, and encourage other employers to do something similar. That it's not just tailor-made to the Department of Finance or the civil service. If it's something that can be used wider throughout society, it's potentially one of the best tools that could come from this.
Yep. Okay, noted, thank you. So how are we going to take that forward then? Are we going to write, or are we going to wait until we revisit this?
Okay, so my suggestion would be that in the first instance we write saying
welcome it.
Well noted.
Yeah.
Okay, welcome it, and that we would ask for
Updates.
cite of it when it comes. And do you want to say something further, saying you would hope that it would be a model for other employers, or do you want to wait until you see it?
I think that we would need to do that now. That we have an influence on how it's being put together.
Right. Thank you. Okay, so are we content to be on the draft forward work programme? Yep. Okay, so pages 261 to 264 of your packet, I'm going to ask the Assistant Clerk to talk you through the changes to the forward work programme. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So we covered a lot of these in strategic planning, but just to put them on the record in open session. So next week on the 7th of May, we will have our training with the Safeguarding Board on trauma-informed approach, and we'll also have a shorter meeting to look at the consideration of the updated draft report for the inquiry. On the 14th of May, we'll look at the Victims Payment Scheme. So first of all, hearing from stakeholders in a panel session, and then we'll hear from the President of the Board and TO officials, and then lastly VSS on the Victims Payment Scheme. And then on the 21st of May, we'll hopefully have the rescheduling of today's EU session, and also hopefully the 3 overseas bureaus together. And then lastly, we'll consider the feedback on the final report for the inquiry. On the 28th of May, we will potentially look at a briefing on the forthcoming bill, and we'll also hear from the from the Permanent Sec on the Permanent Business Plan. And then on the 4th of June, we're going to look at some further preparation for the bill in terms of training with the Safeguarding Board, and details of that will follow in due course.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks. Okay, are members content? Go ahead, Timothy.
Just quickly, a note that we have a date for the First Ministers coming, just to reiterate. The junior ministers haven't been here on their own. We're quickly coming to summer recess, and if we wait till after the First and Deputy First Minister come, we'll have missed it. So I think it's important that we try and put the pressure on that in May, early June, that they come and appear separately, so we can understand what work they're undertaking as the 2 junior ministers.
Okay, we've had such a long session. I can't remember whether we said that they were coming in open session or in our strategic planning, but do you want to reiterate when we think that they're going to?
First and Deputy First Minister will be coming in open session.
Yes, but I'm saying, when did we discuss it today?
Yes, sorry, strategic planning. Feels like a long time ago.
Yeah.
And then we'll go back to the department and confirm in terms of the junior ministers if they'll be appearing with them or looking at a separate date.
I think we need to be clear that they need to come separately.
Yeah. On what date was it? Sorry,
the 25th of June.
25th of June. Go ahead, please, Carol.
So my understanding was that the First and Deputy First Ministers were coming with the junior ministers.
Okay. Well, that's what we were saying. We weren't clear about that. We just need that confirmed.
Okay.
Is there not an expectation that they appear before committee separately?
No, I think it's up to the First and Deputy First Minister. You know, they will have allocated them certain areas of work, and that then they work under the direction of the First and Deputy First Minister. They don't work autonomously from them, so it would really up to the First Deputy. So again, when they come to committee, it's up to the First Minister whether they answer questions and stuff. So
The last strategic day that we had, or afternoon, was it not a case of there's an expectation the First and Deputy First Minister come X amount of times and then they appear additionally on top of that on their own to give us more idea of what work they're undertaking within the department?
okay, go ahead please, Clark, if you can respond to that.
I can provide some information in relation to that. So that discussion happened when we were working in line with that is how things happened in the previous mandate. So in previous mandates, the junior ministers had specifically identified areas of responsibility which they took forward and they led on. In my understanding is that in this mandate, that's not the same arrangements as there were previously. So my understanding, and we are waiting for clarification on this, my understanding is that at FMDFM and the junior ministers would come together because there isn't a separate, they don't have separate leads, there's no separate issue. But we're waiting for clarification on both of those things, but the date indicatively is the 25th. So the previous arrangement was because the junior ministers, in previous mandates, the arrangement was thus because junior ministers had specific responsibilities which they took a lead on. So for example, that was EU exit matters, for example, in the last mandate, and in the mandate before that it was equality matters. So that doesn't, it's not clear what those arrangements are in terms of my understanding is that they don't have separate delineated areas as was the case during previous mandates, and in this mandate that they would come together with the FM and DFM. That's my understanding, but I can't speak more authoritatively than that until we get clarification.
Go ahead please, Claire.
Sorry, Chair. Just on that point, maybe that's what you're doing. Can we ask if they have specific subject areas, because they do answer questions in the chamber.
Urban villages being a prime example.
Yeah, so to me that they're doing something. So could we maybe ask what they're doing, even in correspondence to clarify Timothy's point and what we're saying here.
Okay, that's a fair point. Thank you, Claire. Okay, members, any other business? Go ahead, please.
A couple of things just for clarity, I suppose. It's been a long session, so the committee did agree to get legal advice. So regarding the Supreme Court ruling, so is that left with the clerk then to go and commission that?
I didn't hear any. I'm content for the legal advice. Yeah.
And the other one was a suggestion Brian had made about safeguarding the union and getting something pulled together regarding what problems that had removed. It was writing to somebody, but I don't think it was a suggestion you put forward. We were talking about the parcels, but I don't think it was anything that was put to committee. So it's just to clarify.
Were we not going to write to the executive and also then the UK government around how they were promoting? Yeah, that was.
We agreed that.
Just to
Well, yeah, if we could get clarity on what was agreed yesterday at the joint committee, how that impacts on parcels for customers.
Right to the committee, yeah, okay.
But yes, two questions, both Timothy. Second is how this has been promoted, both to the public and to
We have a note
suppliers.
of that.
Okay.
And the other thing was the time the table papers arrived today. 15 minutes before we went into the strategic planning session.
I issued them to help members to formulate responses to what was a large amount of correspondence. They were just a basis for discussion to assist what was going to be a long discussion today. There was no sort of substantive information in relation to them. They were just to action to assist members. I appreciate they came at 1 o'clock today, but there was a huge pack of information, so apologies for that, but they weren't substantive items of paper, so I put them down to help you formulate.
And that, in fairness, that was very helpful, but I thought maybe they'd come from the department, and that was a problem.
No, it's really just to facilitate the meeting, but like any item, we can say we didn't receive it in time, whether it's internally or externally. So
could we get that? And I know in previous times it's been printed out and left on the desk.
Yeah, table papers, that's fine. I think that's fine. Any other business, members? No? Okay, thanks very much, everybody. Thank you.
Committee Room 30, sound. Committee Room 30, Sound.